for me. But so James Richardson, Bonnie Chan-Meyer. We're both with MNP. And we're going to talk a little bit here around what you will be able to expect from the technical study. So it's not completed yet. It's underway. We'll tell you where we are in the process. But just to give you that orientation so you know, okay, that's one of the pieces that I'm going to get in this process as an assembly member, how I can use that and what's going to be for. So first we'll talk just briefly about MNP. We're going to give you a sense of the methodologies, like how are we going about this? In broad strokes, you have to determine what information you want to have. You get it, you have to structure it in a way that you can actually look at one versus the other. Then you gather some of the findings, and then we can present that back to you. Our job is not to make any recommendations. It's merely just to show you what the similarities, differences, and insights that are derived from that. There's the study elements. We are all subject to the confines of time and resources. So it can't be everything. It's the which ones and why. You'll be able to talk about that, see where that lands for you. And then go into a bit of an overview. So we have a table of contents, but then saying, okay, this is what's going to be in those things. This is what you can expect to see there. This is how it'll give you some information to work through this process. So Bonnie and I will tag team a little bit. We'll take the easy questions and we'll punt the hard questions back to Peter. It's just the way it goes. So about MNP, we're right across the country. Yes, we responded to something, but I think that the advantage that we have is Bonnie and I are based out of Edmonton. I've got a couple of my colleagues here that are also on the team that are right here from Victoria, Bill and Adam over there. But from the team that's doing some of the analysis, we have no stake in the game. I'm not worried about which way it does or doesn't go. We can bring 100% objectivity, discipline, and method to the process for you. And then you decide what that looks like and what that means. Work a ton with municipalities. Coincidentally, for this one, I worked on a big project on a similar type of initiative. It was between urban and rural, both adjacent. And it wasn't so much about, they didn't have a referendum around should they amalgamate or not. They had a really long name to it. It was a collaborative alliance exploration is what they called it. So kind of the same thing, different pile, different name. But a lot of that really deliberate analysis, like what happens if we put these things side by side? What are the pros? What are the cons? What does that mean to us? And then walked them through that so they could ultimately take on their decision and look at what their journey was going to look like. So my role is to make sure that the team has everything that they need, get a chance to talk to many of you many times, and then work with the rest of the team that's there. So Bill and Adam, like you see, they're there to provide some of that local context. Also, we have an office and a team here in Victoria, so we can draw upon some of their team members and colleagues as we're undertaking the work. And then, Bonnie, I can let you introduce yourself. I want to do it for you.
You can see I'm a little shorter than James, so I'll be adjusting this. So I'm Bonnie. I'll be the project manager for this, and I've had an opportunity to talk to a couple folks here, and so grateful that you are giving your time and your knowledge and your experience to share this with us and have this conversation. I know we're really set up as a presentation right now, but we're really hoping to engage in discussions with you. It's really intended to be a back and forth process. I was really happy to hear about equity and inclusion. I actually come from working in that space, as well as doing a lot of municipal work with James. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike. So we're going to talk a little bit around the methodologies. And the first thing I wanted to start with is just a bit of an analogy. So coming back to that whole concept, we don't have unlimited time. We don't have unlimited resources. So how should we go about picking which ones to go a deep dive on? So I kind of refer to it as this big rocks analogy. You may have seen it before, but if you have, rocks, pebbles, and sand, and you want to fill a jar, first you put the big rocks in, then you can put the little pebbles around it because they'll sprinkle through, and the sand will fill in the rest of the space. You probably have to give it some vibration, but it'll work out in the end. If you do it in the other direction, if you put sand in first and then pebbles and try to get the big rocks, you run out of space. And then if you turn the big rocks into the big, programming and service delivery elements, if you don't look at some of the big ones, have you gotten the best and fullest picture of what it looks like, what the comparison is? we can look at a lot of tiny things, but it kind of fits into the less so what than if you look at all of the big things. And if that works, doesn't work, it kind of gives you a big answer to whatever else that we haven't talked about that would be in the proverbial pebbles and sand. Does that make sense? There's more to it than that. We're not just picking big rocks, but that was our kind of our starting construct. And then I'm just going to jump ahead to study elements and the how first, and then we'll jump back. So then from the big rocks thinking, we added a couple more guidelines to it, and we worked through this with both the District of Saanich and City of Victoria. So the guidelines that we're using is, okay, it should be a large cost driver for the municipality because that gives it some magnitude and some materiality. It should be high-profile elements, so that's high service use and prevalence, so something that's pretty often and well known, and then deemed important to the public. There are many municipal services. Many for you and I probably don't even know that it's actually happening. It's important, but the most important ones we know and we see. Many of us know that they're municipally delivered. Some of us would know it's just a government that does it. But it's important that those visible elements, because when you talk to your neighbors, when you talk to each other, it's going to be top of mind. So that led us to these 7 elements. So looking at taxation, I heard a comment earlier saying, well, how does it compare side by side? That's what we've been asked to do. How does it compare side by side? There's a couple of building blocks that go into that, but you need to see kind of all of the detail all at once to say what's similar, what's different, how does that compare? Capital asset management. Long term, that kind of just means what do we have in the portfolio of assets? You heard a lot about that from both the 3 CEOs today. And then how is that working for funding? Like, where is that sitting for the long term? How much of that is planned? How much of that is funded? What does that look like? Roads and transportation. My experience, especially with, actually it's both with urban and rural, like what are the top 3 priorities that everyone usually has something to say about? Roads, and roads. So it's either potholes, or it's not fixed, or it's not flat, or it's having any kind of different problems. So a thorough analysis would not be thorough if we didn't touch on that. Emergency services, also really important to make sure we have a look at how does that compare, what is that looking like. Recreation and parks, we had a lot of that background from the 2 municipalities as we've been working into it and hearing a lot of it today. There's different dimensions to it, but they're important in both municipalities, both from the visibility, deemed importance, and the prevalence. Corporate governance, that's really more about how's it structured, what do the departments look like, how is it managed, is it similar, is it different, is an impact. And then planning and development. Bonnie and I were sitting in the back as a lot of these conversations go, we're like, good, that sounds like it's important to them, that's important to them. This is going to be an easier presentation than I thought. So those are the 7 big rocks, or the big elements that we're going to be diving into. So that's what they are. I'm going to turn to Bonnie, who's going to talk a little bit about, so how are we going about that? Where are we now? And then we'll go into what is it going to look like on the page and in the report.
You can leave it there, actually.
Leave it there?
Yeah. So we do have a slide for it, but I don't want to keep bouncing back and forth in case your eyes boggle. So in terms of the process that we're taking, as we've kind of heard, it's really collaborative with the municipalities. And it's too bad the CEOs have left, because I do want to extend such a great thank you to them, because their staff have been amazing in providing information to us, and a lot of information. When we started, I was like, please bury us and all the information that you can give. So what we first did was we created a template to help bring the apples to apples together. And what we heard immediately was like, well, you're not going to get apples to apples. Maybe. So we're going for a berry to berry comparison here. We're trying to get the fruit, at least all of them to be fruit together. So there are key elements in this template that we've asked all the departments to fill in. And as you can imagine, that there are different departments for each municipality that are under each of these study elements. So they're a little bit different for each one, but you'll be able to see that when we pull this together in a technical study. Again, trying to bring the apples to apples together. And the process that we've taken to bring that data collection is we first went out to municipalities and said, hey, this is a template that we'd like to fill out. Is there anything we're missing? And we sent a really formal written request for information. It's like, this is what we're looking for. And they sent us the information. Then we input into the template. Then we actually had really great conversations and interviews with folks there. So we filled it out some more, went back to them for more written information. And we're in the very final stages of finalizing those templates with them to make sure that we have the right information. And as we're developing the technical study, when we kind of bring together that analysis, we'll be going back to them to make sure it's like, hey, this is the data point that we included. Is this correct? So this process has really been intended so that the information provided is rigorous, it makes sense, and it's accurate, so that we can make sure that you have the best information possible. So based off of that, our team is in the early stages of conducting the analysis. So we've pulled things out into a comparative template, and we are really trying to point okay, this is the piece that we're comparing, this is what it looks like in Saanich, and this is what it looks like in the city of Victoria, and we bring that together into a technical study. So we speak a little bit to what to expect under these different study elements, but that's a bit of the process that we have taken to pull together that information. So again, a huge thank you to the municipalities and all the work that they've done to pull this information together. It's a lot of work. Right. So a bit of how we're going to take on the analysis, and I know this is quite high level, but as James alluded to or spoke very explicitly about, is that this is really intended to be a comparative analysis. So there's perhaps some pieces of information that you're really curious about with District of Saanich, but there might not be the same type of information that's in City of Victoria. So we're trying to bring as much possible in a comparative analysis so you can see what the key operational, financial, administrative service elements look like. We expect for all the study elements that there's going to be some common comparative points. So looking at operational budgets per capita. So that's the operational budget divided by population. So how much per person does the operational budget go towards? What are the mandates and visions? So we've even heard with sustainability that there is some common elements. With active transportation, that there are common commitments related to increasing that different modality. There's also looking at the different services provided, so the types that are provided under each of the study elements, as well as the partnerships and agreements. And I think this was a huge discussion point today of that there are different agreements between different municipalities. So not just through the CRD, but we hear that Saanich has an agreement with Oak Bay. So what does this mean if they were to amalgamate? What does that mean for that agreement? And then another item that we expect that we'll be comparing are metrics and targets. So this is what we expect at the very early part of our analysis that you'll be able to see across the different service profiles. We also expect that there will be very specific things to each study element that is not in this general list. So parks and recreation, yes, we'll be looking at the number of parks, the hectares of parks, and the number of recreation centers. So that's very specific to that study element. Anything to add?
Missed the question back here.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So you talk about the services that are provided, the types, et cetera, and then metrics and targets. Do you look at the quality of service or the level of service? Like you talk about budget per capita, but one might be paying for something completely different from the other.
Mm-hmm. So we will be looking at that service level as much as possible. So it does depend a bit on that information that is available. So at the very least, we'll be able to compare the services that are provided as they're listed out. But in terms of, we'll be able to provide exactly, I'm from Edmonton, right? How often your snow is going to be shoveled? Maybe, maybe not, because that's pretty detailed, i.e. very often. So that's a bit of the balancing act that we're taking in terms of what information do we have available.
Yeah. So thanks for the question around service levels. So it's often part of the conversation and discussion on what you look for from a municipality. But in my experience, it's often not defined. And what I mean by defined, it's not written down. It's not in a policy. It's not, this is exactly how it's done. You have good people doing good work and achieving good results. Typically, it's more complaint driven. If a complaint comes through council or through anything else, is it adjusted, is it shifted, or is it otherwise? Best leading practice is defining those service levels, saying, in all of our parks, we're going to mow once a week and it's going to be no taller than 3 inches. So if we got a lot of rain and then a lot of sun and we're actually at 4 inches or 5 inches and it's been less than a few days and there's something happening, that service level actually says we should get out there earlier. I think it happens in practice, but the difficulty for us in doing a technical study is if it's not written and codified, we can talk about the things what we're seeing, but it may not be written and codified saying this is in Saanich and this is in Victoria. So it depends.
Those metrics and targets are not defined by you to try and evaluate the service level.
No, we're collecting and organizing and structuring so that you can kind of run down and look at what is it side by side to the best of the ability. So again, like Bonnie was saying, it should be fruits. Hopefully it's like, if it's apples, it's going to be Macintosh and Gala, but it's not going to be the exact same thing on side by side, but as close as we can for you. There's a question over here. Yes, sir.
Other partnerships and agreements, does that include union relationships and general liabilities within the organization?
So part of the service profiles, we've identified which unions the 2 municipalities are part of, but we won't be diving into the union agreement specifically. Does that, address your question?
It does. It's a pretty big question.
Correct, yes. So I think it's been interesting because I think they're actually, you know what? No, I'm going to speak to that because that's early analysis and I don't want to set the stage. But totally appreciate the point that it is really important. So at the very least, we'll be able to see which unions their staff are part of, because you're right, that discussion is really important.
Just one question to follow up to that. So based on this, will we be have the opportunity to ask more questions or comment on your organization of the template, or will it be you provide it and we'll work with that?
So unfortunately, we had to get started before we came here. So this template itself is set up already. We try to capture as much of these key points as possible. I know these 6 doesn't quite capture what is in the template itself, but it's quite robust. So we also ask for a number of FTEs. We ask for them to break down in terms of different managerial levels, the number of staff who are unionized, the different services, the different processes. Sorry, I'm sure my colleagues in municipalities are giggling a little bit because they really had to sift through that information. So, no, unfortunately not, but we will be roaming around when you're having your small group conversations as well to kind of keep an ear on and listen and understand what might be interested to the group here.
So I know there are a number of other questions. We'll take that question. You have 3 or 4 more slides that are going to get into some of the detail in each of the areas about what you're attempting to quantify. But first, a question.
Just mentioning that I think many of us have been impressed and interested in the amount of CRD as to influence and involvement in a lot of these things that maybe we thought were just Saanich or Victoria. Are you also including CRD measures in your analysis?
So we won't be including CRD measures, but we will be including them as part of the technical study and understanding them as a very important key stakeholder. So one of the things that we'll be looking at is what are the services that are provided by the CRD? What are the agreements that are in place? And it's not just the CRD, it's other municipalities as well. So that is certainly part of the considerations of the technical study.
Yeah, I mean, you heard a lot of it as an initial presentation today from each of those 3. So the purpose of the technical study is also to put it all into one place, because if you're anything like me, there's no way you're remembering every single thing you heard today. I'm sure all of you are way better at organizing paper than I am. I try to be as digital as I can because it's easier to do a Control F, but try to keep all of the materials that you had today and then keep them structured. Our job is to structure it to give you that information to look through on a technical basis. So there'll be an inventory of services, but it's not going side by side of the 3. It's Saanich and Victoria side by side, and then making sure you understand what the Capital Region District does as well. So maybe we'll just. So I think we can take more questions here in a couple of minutes. What we're going to do is just walk through those 7 elements and give you a bit more flavor. Like, okay, so what's going to be talked about in that section? There's the structure of the section, but then, if we're talking about taxation, what does that mean? It means that we're going to look at how finance, like the finance function, operates for both of those municipalities. How are they structured? What does that look like? Is it decentralized, centralized? How does that compare? And then areas such as tax rates, they talked a lot about the average homeowner, but in a municipality you have both residential and non-residential. So what do those look like? What's the mix? So is it 50-50, 60-40, 80-20? That's the distribution, and then the portfolio of other revenue sources. So that could be fees and charges. It could be other grants. So just to be able to have a sense of like how is that coming together? What is that looking like over time? Then from the capital asset management, talked about a little bit initially, but first is inventory. So what are they? Where are they? What do they look like? We got some good information presented earlier this morning about the overall condition. So I think Brent outlined and showed what the pie chart was between the good, very good, fair, and not fair. The condition of assets, but have a look at that side by side. And then also, what's the plans for new capital and how is that going to be managed? How is that going to be funded? Roads and transportation. So it's just, again, inventory. What does it look like? How much of which things do you have? How is it managed? And what are the priorities around that? Do you want to do the next one?
Okay. So we're also going to be looking at emergency services. So how we're defining it is looking at fire as well as police. So the reason why we didn't include ambulance is because it's a provincial mandate. So wants to look at those 2 here. And then also looking at recreation and parks. We know the capital region has amazing green space. So we wanted to make sure that we capture that as well as recreation opportunities. I know a lot of people live here for that. So we know that's very important. And we also want to include what does the infrastructure look like? What do the natural assets look like as we can? And then as well as what the community programming is available. So we talked a little bit about corporate governance. As a policy wonk, this is very interesting and very exciting for me, but it really sets how an organization functions. It sets the stage and the foundation for things. And this is also where IT lives. So IT can be very expensive. It can be very important as we're talking about efficiencies. So we certainly wanted to include them here. HR is also in this function on how the people who support the municipalities are supported and work in that workspace. Planning and development, we've heard quite a bit of this, especially with the permits and also with zoning. Affordable housing is also impacted here and housing in general. Oh, I got too excited. My apologies. So those are the 7 elements that we'll be looking at. They don't, as James was saying, they don't encompass everything, and we fully recognize that. But from our experience in working with municipalities, they do cover off a lot of those big rocks. When we think of the day-to-day life, again, living in Edmonton, it really is about potholes and snow shoveling. I know it's a little bit different here. So this is a bit of what we talked about with municipalities on how to move forward. But, sorry, this is what this slide is about. There's going to be a group activity after this. Sorry, Peter, I'm stealing your thunder. To have a bit of discussion of what do these mean to you, and what might some other topics and issues rise up? And we've heard a little bit here, but we do want to listen and understand what those might be. I think, again, one of the important caveats is what can we bring to the table to compare? And is that information readily available? Because it does create a bit of a confine of what we're doing. However, our technical study is only a component of what you're doing. So I think that's also one thing to think about as well.
Just one more. So I think that have confidence too, just even from the 7 pieces that we've talked about, that represents a very large component of the operating budgets of both of those municipalities. So it's not everything, but it's such a large component, you're just about getting there. It's kind of like, is it important to get 100% or is 80%, 85% pretty good? Because how much effort is that last 15% to how much gain? It's kind of the same concept. It's not that it shouldn't be done or can't be done, is we don't have the time and resources. So let's focus on the ones that make the biggest impact, have a really good look, and use that as really good information to support the process.
All right, very good. I want to open the floor for some questions, and maybe we can just dial back to the slide that lists the 7 areas just before these. And before we turn to the tables and have a discussion about what we think we need to know, what would be nice to know, any questions for either Bonnie or James?
Where does general staffing cost align in that matrix?
So we'll look at the general staffing costs specifically for each of those 7 areas. So it's kind of a bit of the financial analysis, like how many FTEs and what type. Because, with any service delivery, you can be insourced, so you have your own people doing it. It could be outsourced through contracts or otherwise, or some combination of the two. In municipal services, you also have sometimes where you have casual or seasonal. They talked about lifeguards. That's more of a seasonal or a casual type of employee as opposed to a full-time engineer that's always doing engineering for all things, design and construction. So it'll show up there. And then at the beginning when we're doing the community profiles, so they just overall, what are these two like? You can at least see the total FTEs, total budget, some high-level analysis side by side for those two. Back there.
Point out just black and white where the efficiency opportunities are, where the redundancies could be, or are we just going to show them there?
So I'm trying to get at where are there opportunities for efficiency and effectiveness would be a different type of study and be difficult to do when we're just doing some comparative. We can identify where it appears like there's quite a big difference, and it may be because of certain reasons. But the purpose of this is to give you a comparative analysis, not identify those types of opportunities. I get where you're coming from, but I got to manage my scope and make sure I'm doing the right things at the right time. There's one back here, and then we'll come over.
When you look at the study elements, do you think those garrison at all in the past, present, future of any of those?
So when we look at the study elements, do we compare past, present, future? So future would be difficult, but past and present.
Look at the future based on past performance.
Yeah, we can draw it out from the information we've been given. So, then that would be from budgeting essentially, right? So we can look at, historically, what has it been for budgeting? And then if there's future forecasts in the budgeting, what that looks like as well. So to that degree, we can, yes. But we want to make sure that everything that we're presenting in a technical analysis is factually based, and you can find the chain of evidence to get back to it.
But for instance, we saw today both CAOs present their 5-year budget.
Yep.
Future casting, I think you're picking up on, are you just looking at this year, or are you going to go to the end of their 5-year cycle?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So where we have 5 years for both, yes. If we have 3 for one and 5 for the other, we'll probably do 3, just so we can have the exact same thing on both sides.
So if I get it, you're going to try and create conflatable or comparable data from 2 different disparate sources. And within those community budgets and systems, there's more disparate systems and so forth that you're going to pull that data from. You mentioned accuracy. Accuracy is one aspect of information or data quality. There's other aspects. Will you be able to give us a sense of maybe when you're trying to make comparable data, but it's the accuracy from one source is not the same as the accuracy or comprehensiveness or currency from the other, and it's difficult to make a comparable? Will you give us a sense of where data accuracy or data comprehensiveness make it difficult to make comparisons?
Yes. So in the report, if there's instances, like there's going to be some times where it is one for one. It's neatly the same place in the same way between the two. So it means the same thing. In other cases, even just the way that it's organized, managed, and tracked, you may not be able to fully separate out and isolate the exact same thing on one versus the other. So in those instances, yes, it's absolutely going to come with a note saying it's close. It's still a good comparison, but be advised, it's not perfectly identical on both sides of it, and to what degree that makes a difference. So just to make sure you have that information. So a good point around accuracy, and then also the context of the data and the comparison you're looking at in each instance. Yes.
Thank you.
How will we have access to your study when it's done? Do we just get to look at it when you're here one day? Will it be online and we can like chew through it over time?
You will get a physical copy
Okay.
of this and a digital version, so you can control F. But we'll also be releasing it to the community as well, so it will be a public resource.
Just a quick question, I guess probably in the corporate governance section perhaps. Will you be examining or displaying information about like various systems that are used and utilized, like if there's similar or different, say, HR systems or accounting systems, so that you can extrapolate, this could become very complex or this might be very simple. Do we have that kind of analysis or observation?
To the degree that we have the information, yeah, that is part of the request for information. But in the two municipalities that don't have the same level of specificity on like an inventory of programs and services or IT, but where we have those information available, yes.
It gets to what has been a stumbling block for other jurisdictions that have attempted to amalgamate, and then they found that they've got incompatible systems, and the costs of porting one into the next has then really increased. So part of the study is to flag, I think I'm right, some of the implementation issues that might arise.
Considerations, yeah.
Sorry?
It may be semantics, Peter. I would just call it considerations. And the reason for that is because we'll flag it as like, this is something to consider, but it would require greater research and more in-depth to find out to what degree does that affect cost, time, energy, and all those kind of things. But it's like, I'm going to put a little circle around this and say consideration.
And also,
So we're going to be able to tell which municipality didn't give enough information.
They're both very high piles of information.
Yeah.
It's in different formats.
Yeah.
And it will bring into a similar format to give you good information to look at side by side.
So one thing that we'll be doing as part of this conversation is that James and I have been taking a lot of notes of things that you're that you are interested in. And as our team is doing this analysis right now, we are also pulling out some pieces of information that we're like, oh, we should follow up on this particular detail. So the service templates isn't the last time we're going back. We are going to go back. Sorry, our municipality friends. But the templates give us about 90% of the information. So what we expect to go back to is going to be very specific questions of things that we might not have, so we can have a bit more detailed in that comparison. So know that we won't be saying, oh, they gave us more and they gave us less. Honestly, the two municipalities have been incredibly excellent in providing the information that they do have
While doing their day job.
while doing their day job.
I've seen some technical studies that are so technical and so detailed that you kind of need a degree to understand them. I'm just wondering, will this be written that it has to be technical enough that professionals, it's usable, but can it be written that an average guy like me can actually get something from it? Like, I'm wondering if at the end of every section you could give me like the technical study for dummies section.
Executive summary.
So, loaded question. Let me answer it, succinctly. Yes, our job is to write it in a way that it's for you. You are the audience for the report. It's not a report that we should write and say, good luck. We're going to structure it and making sure we're using accessible language, make sure it's easy to work through. It'll be a volume, but it should be easy for you to work through. And the layout, there's going to be a guidance on how to work through each section. You'll see some repeatability to the sections where it's the topic that changes, but then to be able to get used to that. So lends itself to giving you information as opposed to sifting through or looking up or what are they saying.
And perhaps just to give everyone further assurance, there were 5 or 6 firms like MNP that bid on this work. When we were interviewing these different teams, we wanted to make sure that they were writing it for people, not for accounting professionals, right? And so we were convinced that MNP was amongst the best teams able to make the information intelligible for a general audience.
Will there be a data set in the report as well, though? Or your indexings, will that be available online?
I think where the data is, publicly available, yes. So we can, kind of reference that where it is. But for other pieces where we've had to take it, structure it, organize it, and then give that comparison, the data is what is the report content that we've given and synthesized for you.
This question's for you. So they're gonna highlight considerations, MNP's gonna highlight considerations. For us to go make decisions as an assembly group, we need to understand the impacts of those considerations. How do we get that information?
I think it's going to vary, right? It probably depends how strenuous they communicate.
Well, let's pick an easy one, right? The IT infrastructure.
Right.
Clearly, 2 organizations are using different IT infrastructure. We can say that's a consideration.
Yeah.
But one's using SNP and the other's using Oracle. What's the cost to actually merge together?
So if this comes back to us in January, and you and other members of the assembly say, Pete, this is like a flashing, more than a consideration, it could be a big problem. Can you go get some information to give me comfort that this won't become the next, I don't know, federal Phoenix system, right? I don't know how I will do that, but I know I'll have to find a way to do that. And I'll probably be turning to some of my colleagues on the advisory board to figure out the expertise we can access. And I'm sure MNP at that point would also want to try and help.
I think one thing to remember as well, like and Peter, you walked through it this morning, like here's the timeline as it goes through the beginning to end initiative. So right now it's looking at the citizen assembly. You'll come to a recommendation of should or shouldn't. And there's a number of steps that occur after that. And even if there's a decision for any 2 municipalities to amalgamate, it's not, okay, well, Tuesday, everything's new. No, that takes time. That takes planning. That takes sequencing. So, and that's the purpose of when we identify considerations. It could be, this is probably not where you want to start, but, if you need to manage that over time. So just pinging off the IT piece, usually systems, programs, applications have a life cycle to them. So you could be, based on where it is in the life cycle, maybe continue on with 2 different things. And as they both reach end of life, that's your opportunity because you're going to have to do something anyways, regardless if you're apart or together. So that's more the consideration for timing and sequencing.
Any other questions?